I think Cleveland had a great game plan. They dominated the boards. They actually played great defense for a team that wasn't a great defensive team. They had Isaiah Thomas's number, and LeBron's still the best player on the planet. Let's bring in Reggie Miller. He was on the call last night. What did you think before the game started, Reg, was going to happen?
Well, one of two things. I thought, we go into the rest versus rust debate, and I felt that Boston would have a better rhythm coming off that epic, 7-game series with Washington, so they would be in better rhythm than the Cavaliers, who had been off 9 days. So I thought possibly Cleveland would get off to a slow start because they didn't have their legs or their rhythm was off, and the Celtics, because of that, 2 days ago going 7 games versus the Wizards, shooting the basketball will probably be in their favor. But if you look at the first half, one of my keys last night was that they had to win the three-point battle, which they ended up doing by one, but most of those threes came in the second half. They were 2 of 16 at halftime, and a lot of those threes were wide open. So the shooting and the rhythm wasn't there, and the rest for the Cavaliers, because if you looked at LeBron James in that first half, he didn't settle for jump shots. Everything was attacking the paint, and he looked refreshed, rejuvenated, inspired, and that picked up the Cavaliers basketball. And Tristan Thompson, they are going to have to find an answer because, to me, he was game ball because he set the tone at both ends of the floor. But more importantly, he has always been the kryptonite to Al Horford when he was with the Atlanta Hawks. He dominated those teams on the offensive glass, and he really set the tone.
LeBron's playing as well as he's ever played. Why now?
Look, I mentioned this on the air last night. I mean, this is his 14th season, and he is playing his best basketball in the playoffs. And I can remember my 14th year. I was nowhere near where I was, my 6th and 7th year. And he is playing the best basketball I've arguably ever seen. Now, that's saying a lot because he's had some pretty good playoff series, but his overall game and his ability to attack and lead, it's the best I've seen. I don't know if he's on a mission. Like he said, he has nothing to prove, but he is playing inspired basketball, which has lifted his teammates to go to another level. And that's a lot to say for a guy that's, been in the league this long.
Now, you're saying this is the best postseason performance ever for LeBron, not ever by anybody.
No, by LeBron James.
Okay.
Not ever. Okay. By LeBron James that I've seen.
Okay.
I go back to that series a few years ago versus Detroit when they had Chauncey and those guys, when he had, 29 straight points in the fourth quarter. I thought that was a pretty impressive series. The series he had when he was with Cleveland versus Paul Pierce in those Boston Celtics, I thought was pretty good. But overall, the 9-0 start for the Cavaliers and his numbers, they've just been spectacular.
I saw a couple of stories today that the Celtics should trade Isaiah Thomas. I guess looking at him and saying, do we want him for the long haul? Do we want to spend $40 million per year on Isaiah Thomas? We have the number 1 overall pick. So instead of trading the pick, let's trade Isaiah Thomas. What do you think of that?
I sure hope not, and I hope there's some loyalty from the Celtics towards Isaiah Thomas. We're so quick to, go on to the next best thing. Not only has Isaiah Thomas rejuvenated his career, but he's helped the Celtics brand too, getting to the Eastern Conference Finals. And the stories that have come out, obviously, the passing, of his sister and the toughness he has shown with getting, his grill rocked and playing inspired basketball, it has brought the Celtics brand back. So I hope he's rewarded and not traded. I think you need to surround him and build around him. Because if you look at the Celtics landscape, what the Cavaliers wanted to do was basically take IT out of the game, which they did. They don't have a secondary backup. They don't have a secondary scorer. Al Horford, who has played fantastic throughout these playoffs, he's a great role player if you look at the numbers, but he's not going to give you, 25 and 10 on a nightly basis. they need secondary scoring help. So they need to build around Isaiah, in my opinion.
Talking to Reggie Miller. He's got Game 2 coming up tomorrow night in Boston. Would you rather have the Celtics' future or the Lakers' future?
Oh, the Celtics' future. You got the number 1 pick. You have cap flexibility. And you've got Isaiah Thomas, who is an all-star, an MVP candidate. And you've got a great young coach in Brad Stevens. I think, going forward, the sky's the limit. I think they're 2.5 years ahead of Danny Ainge's plan. Danny Ainge didn't think they were going to be in the conference finals this quick. I mean, this team was just, they blew this team up 3 years ago, and look how quickly they've rebounded. They've got guys that, were drafted in the second round starting for them. So, no, they are ahead of schedule. I think if you're a Celtic, the future is very bright. Not to say the Lakers with Magic Johnson, look, you've got the number 2 pick, but you've got some decisions to make. Is Lonzo Ball going to be your pick? Is he going to be that guy that's going to change your franchise? Do you package that pick possibly for a Paul George to Indiana? Are you trying to get to the playoffs next year? Does Paul George, is that in your future? Would Indiana be attractive to that? So there's a lot of decisions Magic is going to have to make, and Rob Pelinka, the new general manager.
Mark Cuban yesterday on the show talked about how once they were eliminated, that the Mavs tanked. They tanked every game. No memo was sent out. He just said they played younger players who that wasn't the best team to put on the floor, but he put out younger players. What's your response to Cuban admitting, an owner admitting that his team tanked?
It goes on all the time.
But not admitting it, though, Reg.
No, it goes on all the time, and I really believe the commissioner is going to have to address this because, look, every time we do a game and we look at the box score and we're coming in to announce a game and you see guys that are playing major minutes or starting that should not be playing, it makes you question, what are these franchises really trying to do? And I applaud Cuban for coming out and being honest, but why? See, that's the problem. We reward that. We rewarded Philadelphia for so many years for not playing guys and basically tanking and continuing to stockpile picks. It's not fair. It really isn't, because we're rewarding losing as opposed to trying hard. I say go back to everyone should have a fair shot of winning that number 1 pick. If it's the San Antonio Spurs, the Golden State Warriors, the Cleveland Cavaliers, the teams with the best records compete with the Phoenix Suns, the Brooklyn Nets, the Lakers, so whomever, because it's not fair to tank just to get the number 1 pick, not play your best players to get the number 1 pick. It's just not fair. Where's the competitive juices in this league? That's why people think, that games are rigged at times, because teams and owners, they're not playing by the same rules, Dan.
Well, McLovin said this yesterday. What if you took out the top 4 teams in the West, top 4 teams in the East, and then everybody else is in the lottery, equal opportunity in the lottery? So there's no tanking that goes on. You're not getting an advantage by tanking at the end of the season. Top 4 teams get home court advantage. They're there for a bigger picture, whereas the other teams, you're all in the hopper here to get the number 1 overall pick.
Well, I think you would get a little bit more competitive basketball. I think teams not with winning records would probably compete more. They would play players. Like the fact that the Brooklyn Nets sat Lopez and some of those players at the end of the year, that last game, for rest was a joke. That's a joke.
Yes.
Seriously, that is a joke. And that's why the commissioner has to do something about it, because you're making the game of basketball laughable. For them to come out and say they're not going to play for rest when they haven't played all year. It's a joke when you have teams with playoff implications and seedings on the line, you're going to rest. It's just a joke.
Have you ever had a moment like Mark Jackson and Jeff Van Gundy had the other night with the Golden State game, that they started talking about dessert early in the game? Like, have you ever had to? What's the oddest thing you guys have talked about?
Look, when you get into a blowout, like we had last night and like what they had in Game 2, look, your mind wanders because you can only talk about so many X's and O's in a 25-point beatdown. So I get it. You know, we've been there. You know, your mind tends to wander. It happens.
But have you talked about dessert?
I don't know if we talked about dessert. We've been all over the place. Trust me. I'm not going to fault that. In fact, it sounded kind of good what they were talking about, the brownie sundae. I like that.
Oh, I thought it was funny. And those two,
it was funny.
Yeah, they're fun. They're Abbott and Costello.
Oh, they're great.
Yeah,
they are great.
They do a great job. Do you have great memories of Boston?
I love the city of Boston. I always loved playing here. Now, we used to get our heads beaten, you know, being drafted in '87, going against Larry Legend and Kevin and the Chief and those guys. We used to get our heads beaten, but it was such a learning experience for a young Reggie Miller to be on the old, you know, parquet floor with the dead spots and the fans were on top of you and, you know, you had no hot water, you know, in your locker room and, yeah, those were cool. And to have a playoff series versus Larry Legend, that's when the Rifleman, Chuck Person, and him were, you know, talking trash. You know, that was my first introduction, like, oh, this is cool. I mean, the playoffs, this is what it's all about, the intensity. And, you know, we knocked Larry out of a game, and he goes in the back, and whatever drugs they gave him, he came back out like Superman. So
wait, how did you knock him out?
I love Boston.
How did you knock Bird out?
Well, I don't know who gave him a shot to the back because that's when he had a bad back at the time. So it may have been the Rifleman who kind of set a hard back pick on him and knocked him out of the game. And I believe this was Game 5 when it was the best of 5. So we were on the road, Game 5, up, double digits. Larry Legend goes out. He's in the locker room. And the next thing, I've never heard this before, even the great Michael Jordan in the old Chicago Stadium, the sound level and the decibel level when Larry Legend emerged from the locker room, I had never heard a crowd go that crazy before when he ran out. Immediately checked in and drained 2 threes, and they were on their run to winning Game 5 and winning the series. But that's when I fell in love, and I just had to be a part of playoff basketball for most of my career.
Take that, Rifleman.
Take that, Rifleman.
Take that, my Rifleman. Hey, Reggie. I think Bird 32-9-7 in that Game 5 against you guys.
An inspired performance. Again, we thought we had it. You know, we had knocked out the head of the snake, and we thought he was done. And he goes in the back and probably gets a shot in his back and comes out like Superman.
If he had stayed healthy, and Len Bias, when they drafted him, if they had him,
wow! Could you imagine those great?
And Reggie too. They had Reggie
Reggie Lewis.
Yeah, who died.
They did.
I mean, they were set up.
Great drafting, great young players that were going to surround and learn from McHale and Bird, and the future was supposed to be so bright for both of them. Remember, Len Bias and Chuck Person were in the same draft that year.
Did you face Bias?
Never.
In college? No?
Never. Mm-mm.
Man, he was crazy athletic. He was like Dominique.
Yeah, unfortunate that, the passing of him. Very unfortunate. I heard he was great, but I never faced him. I never saw him.
Reg has gotten the police coming to your hotel?
No, I'm looking out my window here, and, good old Boston Strong.
Is Popo there?
What's that?
Is the Popo there?
The Popo, no, it's not there.
Okay.
Ambulance is going by.
They never pulled the fire alarm in your hotel in Boston, do they?
Wow, did that ever happen here in Boston? No, it never happened here in Boston. It did happen somewhere on the road, maybe New York. It happened when
I can see where they would do it to you. Spike Lee may have done it to you in New York.
Oh, yes, he probably did. There was a lot of things that went on in New York but that's a different discussion at a different time.
You survived. Game 2 coming up tomorrow night on TNT. Marv Albert, Chris Webber, David Aldridge, and Reggie Aloysius Miller. Thanks, Reg. Good listen last night. And tell the boys we said hello.
Yes, sir, Theodore. Thank you. And Danette, you guys are the best as usual.
That's Reggie Miller.
The Dan Patrick Show, weekday mornings on Audience.